Before you hear what happened inside Buckingham Palace, understand this. What you're about to hear was never meant to leave those walls. It involves a 5-year-old child, a moment caught off guard, and a single sentence so honest that it forced the most powerful family in Britain to confront a truth they could no longer control. This is not rumor. This is not tabloid noise. This is a moment that changed royal boundaries forever. What you are about to hear is not merely surprising, it is profoundly unsettling, the kind of revelation that lingers long after the words have been spoken. Behind the heavily guarded gates of Buckingham Palace, far removed from flashing cameras, rehearsed smiles, and centuries of royal tradition, an unexpected moment unfolded in absolute privacy. A moment so raw, so unfiltered, that it sent shockwaves through the very heart of the royal household. On an otherwise quiet afternoon, when the palace grounds were calm and the world outside carried on unaware, Prince Louis found himself standing face to face with the Queen Consort. He was just 5 years old, small in stature, innocent in appearance, but what he said next carried a weight far beyond his years. With no rehearsed politeness, no royal conditioning, and no understanding of protocol, he spoke from a place of pure, unguarded truth. "You're not my mother." The words landed like a fracture through stone. They didn't simply echo through the palace gardens, they cracked open emotions and realities the royal family had long worked to keep hidden. In that single sentence, boundaries were drawn, identities were challenged, and a carefully constructed image was quietly shaken. This moment did not pass unnoticed. It was witnessed by a royal guard, someone sworn to vigilance, discretion, and silence, a man trained to protect the institution at all costs, to observe without reacting and to forget what he sees. But this time was different. What unfolded before him was not political, ceremonial, or strategic, it was deeply human, and silence for once was not an option. What followed was not chaos, but something far more dangerous to the monarchy: truth. This is not just a story about royalty. It is a story about power and family, about emotional boundaries that cannot be forced, and about the quiet courage of a child whose voice, small but unwavering, shifted the atmosphere of an entire palace. Before we uncover what truly happened in the moments that followed, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications, because these are the stories you won't hear in polished headlines or official statements. These are the moments that happen behind closed doors, the ones that reveal the real human cost of life inside the crown. Now let us return to that fateful afternoon where everything changed. The autumn sun hung low over the palace gardens, its warm amber light stretching lazily across the manicured lawns. Long golden shadows spilled over perfectly trimmed hedges and carefully tended rose bushes, their late-season blooms still clinging to life. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and for a fleeting moment, Buckingham Palace felt less like a fortress of tradition and more like a quiet sanctuary. It was a Thursday, calm, routine, and entirely unremarkable in every outward sense. A day like countless others that had come before it, and yet beneath that peaceful surface, something subtle was already shifting. Near the rose garden, Prince Louis sat cross-legged on the grass, his small frame hunched in concentration. In front of him, his favorite toy soldiers were arranged with deliberate care, some standing at attention, others positioned behind fallen petals and twigs that had become makeshift barricades. At just 5 years old, Louis was already a familiar face to the world, beloved for his bright eyes, infectious grin, and the playful mischief that so often slipped through even the most carefully choreographed royal appearances. But here, away from the cameras and crowds, he was simply a child. Completely absorbed in his imagination, Louis whispered strategies under his breath, shifting tiny figures from one position to another. In his mind, this garden was no longer a royal estate. It was a battlefield, a kingdom, a place entirely his own. It was a world where he felt safe, creative, and free. A world untouched by rules, expectations, or titles. Then came the sound that shattered it. Footsteps. The crunch of gravel against stone cut sharply through the calm, snapping the fragile thread of his concentration. The imaginary world dissolved in an instant. Queen Consort Camilla was walking toward him. Her posture was stiff, shoulders squared, movements deliberate and tense. Her expression was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line that betrayed exhaustion and irritation she could no longer conceal. It had been a difficult week, unforgiving headlines, relentless public scrutiny, obligations stacked endlessly atop one another. The weight of it all showed plainly, etched into her face and carried in every rigid step. Louis looked up instinctively. For just a split second, his face brightened, an automatic response, hopeful and unguarded. But the light faded almost immediately when he met her eyes. This was not a gentle approach. This was not warmth. Something was wrong. A strange knot twisted in his stomach as his small fingers curled tightly around his favorite toy soldier. The sense of unease settled quickly, heavy and unfamiliar. "Louis," Camilla said sharply. Her voice sliced through the peaceful air like a blade, harsh and unyielding. "What are you doing out here by yourself?" The words echoed louder than necessary, disrupting the stillness of the garden. Before he could fully process them, she continued, her tone growing more pointed. "Where is your nanny? You know you're not supposed to wander around the gardens alone." Louis blinked, confusion clouding his expression. He hadn't wandered. He hadn't disobeyed. His mind scrambled to understand why he was being spoken to this way. "I'm not alone," he replied softly, his voice barely rising above the breeze. He lifted his hand and pointed toward the palace entrance. "Thomas is right there." At a respectful distance stood his protection officer, exactly where protocol demanded, alert, observant, and deliberately unobtrusive. Camilla's response was immediate. "Don't be cheeky with me," she snapped, her patience visibly gone. "You need to learn proper behavior." Her words came faster now, sharper, tinged with frustration. "Running around like this, getting your clothes dirty, do you have any idea how much those clothes cost?" Louis felt his chest tighten. His eyes began to sting, a hot burn threatening tears he didn't yet understand. He hadn't meant to be naughty. He hadn't broken any rules. That morning, his mother had knelt beside him, smiled, and told him that playing outside was good for him, that imagination and fresh air mattered. Now, he was being scolded for doing exactly what he had been encouraged to do. A short distance away, Royal Guard Marcus Webb stood watch. He had served the royal family for 6 years, long enough to witness private tensions, quiet disagreements, and moments the public would never see. He had learned to remain still, silent, and detached, no matter what unfolded before him. But this was different. He watched the scene unfold, unease tightening in his chest. He had never seen such a harsh tone directed at a child, especially not one so young, so visibly confused, so clearly trying to understand what he had done wrong. And for the first time in his career, Marcus Webb felt the weight of something he could not ignore. His training told him to remain invisible. Years of discipline, protocol, and silence echoed in Marcus Webb's mind. He was not there to intervene. He was not there to react. His role was simple: observe, protect, and disappear into the background. But his conscience told him something else. This was wrong. "But Mommy said I could play here," Louis said again, his small voice trembling now, fragile and uncertain. "She said the fresh air was good for me." There was hope in his words, hope that reason would matter, that the mention of his mother would soften the moment. His eyes searched Camilla's face for understanding. "It never came." "Your mother spoils you," Camilla replied sharply, her tone clipped and unforgiving. "Someone needs to teach you discipline." She stepped closer, looming now. "You're a prince," she continued coldly, "not a street urchin." The word struck him like a physical blow. Street urchin. Louis had heard it before, in storybooks read before bedtime, in tales about children who had no homes, no parents, no one to protect them. Children who were forgotten, unloved, alone. The comparison shattered him. His lips trembled as tears spilled over, hot and unstoppable, sliding down his flushed cheeks despite his desperate effort to hold them back. He scrubbed at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, embarrassed, confused, overwhelmed. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had seen grown men break under pressure, but never a child reduced to this by words alone. "Stop crying," Camilla ordered, irritation sharpening her voice. "Princes don't cry over nothing. This behavior is ridiculous." Louis tried to obey. He truly did. He sucked in shaky breaths, clenched his teeth, forced himself to be still, but the harder he tried, the more his body betrayed him. His shoulders began to shake, his chest hitched with quiet sobs he could no longer control. His grip loosened. The toy soldier slipped from his fingers and dropped softly onto the grass. "Pick that up," Camilla said, her voice cold and dismissive, "and stop making that pathetic noise." Slowly, painfully, Louis bent down. His hands trembled as he reached for the fallen toy, humiliation burning hotter than the tears on his face. Then it happened. Camilla grabbed his shoulder. Not violently, but firmly enough that he enchared and recoiled at once. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Something inside the little boy cracked. Fear surged through him, sharp and sudden. Confusion tangled with hurt, and together they overwhelmed the last fragile thread holding him together. His breath caught, his heart raced, his mind scrambled for safety. He pulled away instinctively, stumbling backward a step, then another. When he looked up at her, his eyes were wide and glassy, pain etched plainly across his face. And then through sobs, through terror, through the raw honesty only a child can summon, he spoke. "You can't tell me what to do," he cried. "My real mommy would never be mean to me like this." The words hung in the air. Silence fell like a sudden storm. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The garden, once warm and alive, felt frozen, suspended in shock. Marcus Webb felt a chill run through him. In that instant, he knew everything had changed. Camilla's face drained of color, then flushed a deep, furious red. Shock flickered across her expression, quickly followed by anger, sharp, wounded, and dangerous. No one spoke to her this way, not staff, not courtiers. And certainly not a child. Louis stood his ground, chest heaving, tears still streaming freely. He didn't understand the weight of what he had said. He didn't know what lines he had crossed or how deeply those words would cut. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't his mother. And his mother would never make him feel this small. The air felt thick, suffocating. Marcus stepped forward, just enough to be seen. No words were exchanged, but a silent message passed between guard and consort. A boundary had been crossed, a truth had been spoken. This moment had a witness, and it would not be buried. What followed did not end in the garden. It moved quietly, deliberately, and relentlessly through the corridors of the palace, rippling outward for months in ways no one could fully control. Whispers replaced pleasantries. Meetings were called behind closed doors. The air inside Buckingham Palace grew heavier, charged with something far more dangerous than scandal, consequence. Reports were filed. Not the kind meant for public eyes or official statements, but internal records, formal, precise, and impossible to ignore. Timelines were documented. Witness accounts were taken. Every word spoken, every action observed, every boundary crossed was carefully recorded. Parents were summoned. Princess Catherine was called first. When she heard the details, every sharp word, every moment of humiliation, every tear her son had tried and failed to hold back, her heart broken away no title could shield her from. This was not about protocol. This was not about hierarchy. This was her child, 5 years old, vulnerable, hurt where no bruise could be seen. Prince William's response was quieter, but far more unsettling. There were no raised voices, no public displays of anger, but those who knew him understood the shift immediately. His fury was controlled, measured, and absolute. A line had been crossed that could not be softened by tradition or dismissed by status. A 5-year-old child had been reduced to tears, physically handled, emotionally humiliated. And that was something he would not allow, under any circumstances. For the first time in a long time, royal protocol bowed to parental instinct. Centuries of unspoken rules, delicate power balances, and carefully maintained appearances took a back seat to something far more fundamental: protection. The protection of a child who had simply spoken the truth. Boundaries were set. Clear, firm, non-negotiable. Access was restricted. Interactions were redefined. Expectations were spelled out in terms that left no room for interpretation. Apologies were demanded. Not vague gestures, not carefully worded regrets. Real acknowledgements, direct, explicit, and unavoidable. Words that named what had happened instead of hiding behind excuses. And accountability, real accountability, was enforced. Quietly, decisively, permanently. Louis, meanwhile, was surrounded by comfort. He was held, listened to, reassured. His feelings were named, not dismissed. His fear was acknowledged, not minimized. And in the safety of his parents' arms, he was told something every child deserves to hear, but so few ever do in moments like that. You were not wrong. You were not disrespectful. You were not bad. You were brave. You spoke the truth. And the truth mattered. Months later, the palace gardens appeared unchanged to the casual eye. The roses bloomed once more, their colors rich and deliberate. The hedges stood perfectly trimmed. The sun continued to drift low across the lawns, casting the same golden shadows it always had. From the outside, it was the picture of continuity, timeless, serene, untouched by what had happened before. But beneath that familiar beauty, everything was different. The garden no longer held the same silence. Louis walked those paths again. A little taller now, his steps steadier, his presence more assured. He was older, not just in age, but in understanding. Something had shifted inside him, something irreversible. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, the kind that doesn't come from being told who you are but from discovering it for yourself. He had learned something powerful, far too early perhaps, but essential all the same. He had learned that even the smallest voice matters. That truth does not depend on rank, age, or permission. That speaking honestly, even when your voice shakes, can redraw boundaries others assume are unmovable. He had learned that courage does not come from crowns, titles, or authority, but from the willingness to stand in your own truth, no matter how intimidating the moment feels. And most of all, he had learned that real change does not always begin with power, commands, or institutions. Sometimes it begins quietly. Sometimes it begins in a garden. Sometimes it begins with a child, small, frightened, and hurting, who finds the bravery to say the one sentence that cannot be ignored. "You're not my mother." And in saying it, changes everything. If stories like this matter to you, stories that reveal what really happens behind closed doors, then make sure you subscribe. Because these aren't fairy tales. They're human moments hidden behind history. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Some truths are whispered, some are buried, and some, like this one, refuse to stay silent.